Let's take a little trip. Let's go to Nigeria. Let's go to Benin City. When we get there, we're going to check out the walls of Benin. They were once one of the largest earthworks the world had ever seen. Today, they're crumbling under the pressures of a modern city and the aftermath of colonial destruction. Their future is unsure, but I still have hope for this fading giant. If you're like me, these walls probably didn't make it into your textbook either. But when you learn of their scale, it's kind of crazy you've never heard of them. The once imposing walls start to draw you in. Those brown tree-lined ridges you see start taking shape. They start revealing a sprawling network of ramparts and ditches, the Iya, handcrafted by people long gone. But those people left a legacy, a monument for their people, that stood as a testament of their own permanence in a fast-changing landscape. If you're from Edo State in Nigeria, I'd love to hear from you. What do the walls mean to you today? Are they a landmark you see every day? Or a story your grandparents told, maybe? Let me know in the comments below what the walls mean to you. Nigeria today has a massive population, an enormous diversity of peoples living within it. Even since antiquity, its dense forests, floodplains, and savannas have allowed many societies to thrive, especially in what is now Edo State. The Bini people, the inhabitants of the historical Kingdom of Benin, were among them, and they became extraordinarily prosperous. Just to orient ourselves, Benin City isn't in the modern country of Benin. The modern country of Benin is actually mostly the old Kingdom of Dahomey, and the old Kingdom of Benin is in modern Nigeria. The Kingdom of Dahomey is its own story in its own right, but not really related to the story of the walls of Benin. And so that's how we find ourselves in the Kingdom of Benin, in Nigeria's Edo State. This is the kingdom that made the world famous Benin bronzes. And they're the same people who built the walls and moats that once surrounded their kingdom, their empire. And as you can probably tell, the walls of Benin, the Iya and Bini, have sparked a real fancy in me. There's so much to be said about them. They've weathered literal and political storms, they've faced both friends and foes, and they helped shape the identity of the thousands who crafted, expanded, and lived with them. Though people had lived in this region for thousands of years, oral tradition and modern dating methods placed the first ramparts and ditches between 800 and 1000 CE. It's a case where oral history and techniques like radiocarbon dating corroborate each other, which is pretty cool to see. I like seeing oral histories come together with the modern world just to be proven correct or on the right path. And this building phase actually predates the establishment of the kingdom's first dynasty. The first handfuls of this earthen beast weren't even dug because of orders from above. Just families, communities, villages working together. And in this formative period, though, we start to see organized centers forming, and the roots of centralized power taking hold. Enter the Agiso, the era of the kings of the sky. When the walled-off villages of the Bini became prosperous, they were unified by Agiso Igodo to form Igodo Migodo. There would be 31 Ogiso by the time of their fall from power. Under their leadership, Igodo Migodo grew larger. And while the Ogiso aren't associated with the famous inner and outer walls, the Bini people during this time were busy expanding their own localized Iya, the same ones that they had started expanding before the Agiso took power. And this helped lay the groundwork for the massive fortifications to come. By the time the last Agiso Awodo from 1125 to 1130 CE, was in power, the internal stability of the kingdom had weakened. Agiso Owodo found himself ousted from power. The Yoruba prince, Oran Miyan, was invited from Ile-Ife to restore order. Oran Miyan reportedly found the complex politics of Igodo Migodo quite vexing. Some even say he called it a land of annoyance, and he eventually returned home. However, he left behind his son Eweka. The Council of Elders approved of Eweka to rule, and he was declared the first Oba, which is a Yoruba title for ruler, and this signaled a new era for the Bini people, ultimately establishing the Oran Miyan Eweka dynasty, the very same lineage that holds the title of Oba today. Under the Obas, the Iyo underwent massive defensive expansions. Oba Aguola oversaw the first major growth, fortifying key points. Later, Oba Eware I would expand the Iya to their greatest extent and build the innermost Iya. This would be the last large-scale expansion of the Iya. And at this point, the outer portion was simply massive. Standing outside the walls, you would have faced a ditch anywhere from 15 to 30 feet wide, up to 20 feet deep in some areas, potentially even more. And then with a 20-foot high, if not a bit taller, mass of earth rising behind it, extending out as far as the eye could see. And if you could see above, it'd be around like a 10-mile circle of just earthen mounds. The scale would have dwarfed you immediately. And obviously, these walls served a very real defensive purpose, but would have been an even bigger representation of the Oba's power and prosperity. Looking up from the bottom of that ditch, the earth would have felt like a mountain. Breaking in or attacking the settlement would have seemed like a very daunting task. But the Oba wasn't the only one thriving in this period. Once inside the outer Iya's safety, an intricate maze of connected walls formed early suburbs. You would find markets and villages spread throughout the Iya, with farmland separated by smaller bulwarks and ditches just like in years past. The pathways linking this maze were connected to manned toll gates, which monitored all the trade and travel in and out of the Iya. This deliberate labyrinth served as both a community map and a defensive boon, eventually drawing you toward the guarded gates of the inner Iya, that imperial court where the Oba presided over the kingdom. The heart of the kingdom, the heart of the Iya, was the imperial court, both literally and figuratively. All roads led to the Oba. All led to the central inner Iya. The vibrant communities of craftsmen, traders, and farmers created networks that fueled the empire. The Oba collected taxes in the form of local goods and cowrie shells, which were a popular currency amongst West African kingdoms. And this trade network allowed Benin to power project and engage with neighbors like Ile-Ife. The pathways that connected these settlements made avoiding the Oba's influence pretty hard. And that influence went beyond tax and trade. The Obas championed the rich tradition of metalworking that already existed in the region, and it ultimately led to the creation of the world-famous Benin bronzes. Interestingly, they're actually brass, not bronze, but we'll get to that. For generations, metalworking had been a custom in West Africa, and Benin took up the mantle with immense pride. Some of these bronze casts show the Obas of old adorned in the same regal attire they still wear today. But these pieces also show more than just prestige. They show a world in transition. They depict the first Portuguese traders marking the moment the earth and beast first met the world beyond the sea. At first, these new traders were welcomed by the Obas. Local goods like ivory, pepper, cloth, and art, like those bronzes, were exchanged for European wares like guns and manillas. Manillas were these horseshoe-shaped weights of copper or brass, which became the raw material for the Bini craftsmen. They would melt them down and transform them into the legendary brasses we've been talking about. That's where the brass came from, these imported manillas. But as the transatlantic slave trade rose, the dynamic shifted. For a time, guns and manillas were then exchanged for human lives. This brought immense wealth to every court that was involved, whether it was the Portuguese, British, or Benin itself. But the Kingdom of Benin eventually chose a different path, and they stopped the exportation of slaves to Europeans much earlier than its neighbors like the Kingdom of Dahomey. The trade largely seems to have been abandoned out of fear of growing European influence, as well as the manpower losses they were having from doing slave raids and from exporting male slaves. And I think it's important to say that, as you can imagine, this trade did not make everyone involved rich. Clearly, the victims of the trade certainly saw none of that wealth on either side of the Atlantic. But we all know trade stops for no one. In place of the slave trade, Benin switched to exporting products like palm oil, which, unfortunately for them, put them on a collision course with the British, who were needing this palm oil for the Industrial Revolution. Before petroleum based lubricants were more common, palm oil was actually being used in a lot of the early machines. Come the late 1800s, European colonial and trade ambitions were no longer sated by what they had already had, and the kingdoms of West Africa were squarely in their sights. British colonies in the Gold Coast had been developing for centuries, and a base in Lagos allowed for expansion further inland. While Britain was often focused on India during this period, its hunger for West African ivory and especially palm oil was running directly into the sovereignty of Oba Avenramwen. Like I mentioned, the Oba was able to control trade and access in and out of the Iya, whether the inner or outer Iya, via those manned gates. And British traders were growing increasingly annoyed at having to obey the Oba's demands and pay taxes. Those manned toll gates we talked about, they were now seen as obstacles. British merchants were increasingly unwilling to pay the taxes required to enter the Iya. The Oba would also sometimes exercise his right to close the markets or restrict access to the Iya in trade. He would do this not just to protect economic interest or reject influence, but also to observe sacred traditions. The British, however, viewed this as an attack on free trade, and this would ultimately be the spark that neither side could or would extinguish, and the stage was set for a confrontation. In January 1897, the Oba had closed the markets because he was making his father, an annual renewal festival. A sacred time of reflection and merrymaking for him and his people. Despite being told the Oba would not receive visitors, acting consul James Phillips and a party of traders, diplomats, and porters marched on the Iya. Their goal was to discuss opening the markets, and ultimately to end the taxation toll system one way or another. On January 4th, at the village of Benin, Phillips and his party, which the Bini saw not as diplomats but as an invading force, were ambushed. The British were not spared, and the local porters were taken into bondage. History suggests that the Oba's generals acted independently, striking without his knowledge or blessing. This event, known as the Benin Massacre to the British, became the pretext for the total ruin of the kingdom. As news reached London, the British Empire prepared its response, a punitive expedition. They could not, would not allow a representative of the crown to be treated this way, especially by a monarchy they viewed as inferior. Throughout the remainder of January, artillery and troops were rerouted to Lagos. The earthen beast that had protected the Bini for a millennium was about to face its greatest and final test of strength. By February 1897, boots were on the ground. British artillery advanced quickly through the bush toward the walls of the outer Iya. 7-pounder cannons, Maxim machine guns, and Hale's rockets lined up along the tree-covered ridges, unloading volley after volley. The earthen beast was pummeled, and the Bini people watched in horror as their homes and defenses were burned to the ground. As the British forces reached the inner Iya, the destruction was nearly complete. The royal palace was sacked and its treasures, the very bronzes that captured the kingdom's history, were looted to pay for the expedition's costs. Oba ibn Ramwen was exiled to Calabar, never to return. In a matter of days, a system built over centuries was torn apart. The giant earthwork that had been and had protected for so long had been toppled and burnt to the ground. Following the death of Oba ibn Ramwen in 1914, his son, Oba Eweka II, was restored as monarch. However, the world had changed. The Oba was now subordinate to the colonial administration, and later, the Federal Republic of Nigeria. While subsequent Obas would successfully revive Benin's artistic heritage, that same attention couldn't be given to the walls. And it makes sense. A colonial administration that had literally just leveled these fortifications wasn't going to fund their reconstruction. And without the direct control of the trade of palm oil and other goods, the wealth required to maintain such a massive earthwork vanished. Combine that with modern urbanization and sprawl filling in the moats and ditches, the result was almost complete erasure in just a few generations. And that's the truly insane part to me. Before the mechanical era, the interconnected Iya formed one of the world's largest earthworks. By most accounts, the total length of the system is comparable to the Great Wall of China, though obviously not without controversy or frankly a bit of snark from the skeptics. Many struggle to believe the claim because the Iya wasn't built from stone, and because so much of it isn't here today to speak for itself. But the accounts are there. We have 17th century Portuguese explorers describing a city as large as Lisbon, with walls weaving through the entire settlement, not just the center. It isn't that there is a single wall longer than the Great Wall of China, it's the staggering combined length of this intricate labyrinth that makes the scale so impressive. Mapping those borders today is a race against time. While the Great Wall is a manicured tourist attraction, the walls of Benin are often covered in vegetation or hidden behind modern lean-tos. The ditches sometimes filled with standing water or debris. Yet they remain a profound source of pride for the Bini people, the very descendants of the architects who dug those trenches by hand. And modern technology is finally catching up to the oral history. We mentioned radiocarbon dating, but tools like LiDAR and GIS are allowing archaeologists to peer through the forest canopy and urban sprawl. And by combining old site maps and local traditions with these scanning techniques, the old borders of the Iya are reappearing. We're finding markers that older sources missed. Things like sacred trees and shrines, hidden gates. That's why working with the local people is so important. It helps us find and corroborate these markers. That's why, perhaps most telling of all, is that the future of the Iya rests with the people that actually live there. Only through local community engagement and dedicated funding can this monument be restored to any meaningful level. And defining what that level of meaningful restoration looks like brings us to a more important question, perhaps, than can the walls be saved? What do the people of Benin City actually want? The answer isn't as divided as you might expect. There is a broad consensus that the walls and moats should be preserved. But what that means in practice is still up for debate. For some, the walls are quite literally home, with houses and lean-tos built along the old ramparts. To others, the ancient trenches now serve as vital drainage infrastructure in a rain-heavy, growing city. Some business interests also see the walls as obstacles, filling them in with waste or clearing them for new projects. And standing against this are the conservationists, scholars, and ordinary residents who see the Iya as a symbol of resilience, a legacy worth protecting. Today, the Iya survives in segments. There are no gates and no guards. But as you walk through the city, you see it in various states of preservation. Could refurbished walls help a new generation connect to a past that was once leveled? Could they bring in tourism and economic opportunities? What the future holds is anyone's guess. We all know cities keep growing, tourism can be lucrative, and people want to remember their history. The walls of Benin are amazing to me. Absolutely massive, not fully destroyed, but definitely in need of care. An entire civilization once shaped itself around these walls. Now the question is whether the walls can help shape a future again. If you enjoyed this, subscribe for more and look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.